Good morning. Welcome to our Bible study this morning. This morning we'll be looking at Philippians chapter 4 verses 10 through 13. Philippians chapter 4 verses 10 through 13. This morning we're looking at the idea of contentment. If there's one thing that, at least for me, one of the things that I struggle with at times in my life is learning the lesson to be content. Paul in Philippians 4 verses 10 through 13 gives us some instruction on how, as Christians, we can learn to be more content in our lives. Let's go ahead and read Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13, and then we'll go back and see what they have to say for us. Philippians 4, 10 through 13. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, when ye were also careful, but ye lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. Here, the last verse, that is a verse we're all familiar with. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. That was Philippians 4, 10 through 13. Paul talking about contentment in the life of a Christian. When we talk about contentment, what are we talking about? Well, let me just share with you. The Greek word for contentment here is a word that simply means it is enough. It is enough. When we say somebody is content, what we're saying is the attitude of their heart is, whatever they're talking about in the context, it is enough for them. That's what contentment is. So if a person is content with their food, the food they have, it's enough. If they're content with the home they live in, as they look at their home, they have a feeling in their heart, this is enough for me. The clothes they wear, if they're content with their clothing, as they look at their clothes, this is enough. That's all contentment means. It is enough. It seems as if this world many times is driven by a lack of contentment. Almost, maybe I don't want to say every, but 99% of the TV commercials, the principle behind them is no contentment. The food you have in your cupboard, that's not enough. You need to buy this sandwich. The car you have out on your driveway, that's not enough for you. You need to come in and buy this car. The clothes you have in your closet, that's not going to do you good enough. You need to come into our store and buy these clothes. You know, the whole idea of advertising is based on the principle people many times desire what they do not have. And so you want to make that item you're trying to sell as beautiful looking as you can. You want to point out as many advantages as you can to somebody buying this item so that it develops in their spirit a spirit of discontentment, so they go out and buy that item. They're not content till they have it. I mean, I believe probably we've all felt that way one time or another about something. There's been something you just wanted, and you've wanted it so bad, you just weren't content until you got it. And you've been restless about it, you would think about it, you just couldn't get out of your mind, you wanted that thing. And so you would just be discontented until finally you got it. Do you know what's really sad, I found in my life at least? It was those very things that would cause such discontentment. Once I actually got them, 99% of the time it was one of the biggest letdowns there ever was. Because once I had it, I would look at it, and you know what? Okay, now that I have it, what was the big deal to start with? Folks, as Christians, if we could just learn the principle of being content, it would help us in our day-to-day walk. Okay, Paul here talks about contentment. Once again in Philippians 4:10, listen to what he says. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. Okay, let me go back just a second and review what's taking place here. Paul's sitting in prison. He's writing this letter, the letter of the Philippians. He's writing to the church at Philippi. So he's sitting in prison. He's been arrested for preaching the gospel, taking a stand for the Lord. He's writing this letter to the church at Philippi. Now keep in mind, while Paul is in prison, his needs were being supplied by those who would send love offerings to him. That's the only way he could supply his needs while he was in prison. Paul says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly, that now at the last your care of me hath flourished again. So Paul says, your love offerings to me, your care for me, has started coming to me again. Wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. Paul says there was a time when, even though the church at Philippi cared about Paul, they continued to pray for him, they did as much as they could, there was a time period where they could not send him any supplies to help meet his needs. Paul says now he was so thankful because they were now able to start sending those supplies again to him. But Paul looks back and he says, during that time I didn't receive any supplies from you. I realized it wasn't because you didn't care for me, it's just you couldn't do it. I realized that you were still careful, meaning you still cared for me, but you simply lacked the opportunity. You weren't able to give me anything, even though you cared about me. So, the context of these next verses is this. Paul had experienced a time in his life when his needs were being taken care of, and he was receiving supplies while he was sitting in prison. But he also had gone through a period in his life when those supplies weren't coming, and he was living without things that he really were beneficial to him. Okay, so keep in mind that's the context. He's experienced both times when he had supplies and times he didn't. Look at this. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned whatever state I am therewith to be content. Paul said, look, I'm not writing to you at all trying to encourage you to send me more. He said, that's not what I'm doing. He says, I'm not writing to you in respect of want. He said, I've learned a lesson. I've learned whatever state I am in therewith to be content. Paul said, those times when you were able to send supplies to me, that's enough. I don't need to write you asking for more. It was enough for me when you sent those supplies. But do you know the times when you weren't able to send those supplies to me? During those times, it was enough as well. He said, I've learned whatever state I'm in, whatever amount of supplies I receive or whatever amount of supplies I do not receive. He said, I've learned to simply accept the fact that whatever the Lord sees fit to give to me, that is enough. Folks, what a tremendous lesson for each one of us as Christians. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to live our lives that way where no matter what condition we were in, whether we had everything we wanted in this world or whether we had nothing we wanted in this world, we could honestly say from our hearts, it is enough. Such a tremendous, tremendous blessing to be able to say that. And I'll tell you, it's a gift from God to be able to say that. He goes on, I know both how to be abased, he knew how to be put down, and to abound. He knew to have, everything coming into him. Everywhere and in all things, I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry. So again, Paul said, man, there were times I was full when I had more to eat than I knew what to do with. There's other times I had to go hungry, when I didn't even have food enough to eat. Both to abound and to suffer need. Paul said again, there were times I had things just overrunning. I had overflowing supplies. I had more than I knew what to do with. There were other times when I really feel like I needed some things I didn't have. But Paul said, you know what? It is enough. He said, during those times when things were just overflowing and I had more than what I knew to do with, it is enough. But those times when I went hungry, I didn't even have enough of food to eat, it is enough. Just stop and think about being able to do that. But, in our minds, a lot of times, at least, I'll just put this on me, in my mind, there are some things that I call a real need on this earth. To me, like clothing, food, and a shelter is something that I need. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of other things that at times I feel like are a need, but really when I stop and think about it, I realize it's not. You give me the Lord, you give me clothing, you give me food, you give me shelter, and I've really got everything that I, in my family, my wife especially, I've got everything I need. But stop and think about Paul going, he didn't even have enough to eat. He's sitting in a damp, cold prison. Not enough to eat, no friends around. During some of his prison stays, it was questionable whether he was even going to make it out or not because he had a death sentence constantly being threatened against him. Think about sitting in that kind of a position where you don't have your own home to live in. You're living in a damp, cold cell. You're probably sick all the time because of the dampness and all the stuff they had in those cells. All the sickness and disease that would spread in the cells. You had none of your friends. You're going hungry. And yet, you know what Paul said? He had learned in his life to say, it is enough. I mean, if you think about it, it is such a tremendous thing for Paul to be able to say, Lord, this is enough. If this is my lot in life, if this is what you would have for me, if I can somehow be a good testimony to you in this condition, it is enough. What a tremendous blessing it is that Paul is sharing with us. Now, as you read down through these verses, before we get to verse 13, as you read down through 10 through 12, you got to be wondering, at least I wonder in my mind, Paul, how can this be? How can you ever get to the point you say, as you're sitting there in prison, cold, sick, hungry, without your friends, without your family, basically just you and the Lord, how can you ever say it is enough? Look at verse 13. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. How can Paul do all that? Through Christ. Through the ability that Christ was giving him. Folks, let me tell you something. A true spirit of contentment does not come from ourselves. It comes from the Lord. If there's ever a time as a Christian you can say, I am truly content about something in my life, you need to thank the Lord because it's because of the Lord you have that feeling of contentment. It's not from you. When you read that verse, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. I know, if you're like me, I've heard that verse applied to so many things. And I think really, probably in the greater context, it does apply to a lot of different areas of our life. We can do all, if Christ calls us to witness to our enemy, we can do it through the strength of Christ, And if Christ calls us to move to a foreign country and be missionaries, we can do that if Christ gives us the strength. This can apply in many ways. I'm not denying that. But really, if you look at this verse in the context, what's it talking about? Contentment. In the context, Paul is saying he can do all things, meaning he can put up with all different situations in his life, whether need or whether overflowing, through Christ which strengthens him. Paul is saying, I can say, it is enough. No matter what situation I may face in my life, because Christ is giving me the strength to do it. Stop and think about it. It's because of Christ we are able to be content no matter what situation we may have in life. Folks, that's what it's all about. That's what Paul is trying to share with us in these verses. He's encouraging each one of us as Christians to be able to say, it is enough, no matter what state we're in. But how do we do that? It is through the strength that our Lord Jesus Christ gives to us. As long as we have the Lord, folks, what more do we really want? Thank you for joining me in the Bible study this morning.